consciousness is the starting point of reality.
Completely antithetical to that attitude in science.
What is reality?
We're now at this great inflection.
Video games and all of that is actually the most important spiritual tools we've got today.
The whole point of a virtual reality is to have useful fiction of causality.
The individual never gets enlightened. It's the enlightenment that becomes the individual.
Space-time is doomed.
Consciousness is fundamental.
Einstein's theory actually predicts its own demise.
Balance is not the ability to stand up, it's the ability to rise up.
Please like, comment, and subscribe.
I really enjoyed what you just said, and I had a couple comments about it. There is some interesting science that sort of backs up what you're saying about, you have to do a lot of doing, and you are sort of wasting a lot of energy doing a lot of weird stuff that you might not have to do, and then eventually you learn to just be and get more centered. In terms of brain activity, it's quite interesting that when you're new at something like playing tennis, for example, or something like that, there's a lot of cortical activity involved as you're learning. But the better you get, the less cortical activity there is. You're getting more efficient, and you're not having to waste your time doing all sorts of wrong things. You know how to focus in on the deep principles of what you need to do in the moment. So that does line up with what you were saying. And also, there seems to be an interesting in quantum computation. Quantum computers, which we'll all have in 10, 15 years, we'll be using them, and it's going to be transformative. But the technology there is stunning, and it does seem to corroborate the kind of thing that you're talking about, in the sense that in quantum computation, on the one hand, you have to set up the quantum bits and the quantum gates to start a computation. And that involves the most precise mathematics, the most advanced products of human thought ever for that to be accomplished. But then when you start the computation, you cannot intervene at all. If you interfere with the computation, if you try to sample what's going on while the computation is going on, you destroy it. Right. You destroy the superpositions, the entanglement that is somehow responsible for this incredible horsepower. And so you get in quantum computation this really interesting dual dynamics going on. Absolute precision with mathematics, human thought at its most precise, and then absolute stopping of any thinking whatsoever, complete non-intervention. And somehow the two are both essential to this. What doesn't get rewarded is sloppy thinking. There is no reward for sloppy, imprecise thinking. There's reward for absolute precise thinking and no thought, no intervention. Now, the only reward that I could say for sloppy thinking is that in the formation of our ideas, of course, we're going to be shooting in the dark, and we'll have sloppy thoughts and so forth. So it's as long as we're not addicted to the sloppy thoughts, I guess they're useful as a search tool. So when I say there's no reward for sloppy thoughts, I guess I should say a little more precisely that there's no reward for sloppy thoughts that are left
exactly.
Sloppy.
Yes, it is the process of because you need to kind of knead and work on it until it kind of crystallizes.
Exactly right. And so that also, I think, applies in our spiritual seeking, our spiritual searching, our spiritual growth, in the sense that the spiritual traditions have had good insights. But it's only been since Galileo that we've learned how to take insights and turn them into something that's really precise and that can come back and teach us, right? That's what we get from science is here's how you take an insight, turn it into something so precise that you can now become the student of your own idea in this precise form. Like Einstein eventually learned from his own theory of gravity, there are indeed black holes, right? You learn something that you might not have liked to see. And so it's in that sense that the mathematics, the precision, and then the silence. So this is going back and forth between silence and precision. And but I guess there is a role for sloppy thought as long as we're not stuck on the sloppy thought,
because
right? As long as
that's always where we start. It's like when you
Right.
get like an idea, something. But I think also, when it comes to true spiritual work, it is extreme precision, and most people don't understand this because one would imagine that there's only focus on great experiences and all of these like fluffy things, but true spiritual work is about truly developing the methodology to test and to explore, because you're basically going beyond the mind, you're going beyond the human form, you're going beyond this type of reality. And you need to test it out. First, you need to figure out, how can I experience it? How can I go beyond, the limits of my own mind and my own self? And then over time, you have to test and test and test and test. And you go through the same thing where you kind of trick yourself and you make things up and it's fantasy imagination. But over time, you will need and you will, work on it. And gradually it will crystallize and you will get it. And it's a result of decades of dedicated work every day, 24/7. And gradually it happens, and you start realizing things that are kind of far beyond human existence. And it does take that systematic approach. And you need to also be able to kind of test yourself and understand the difference between what you project and what life is showing you, how to evaluate, how to kind of come to the conclusions that will pull you forward. And at the same time, knowing that no matter what you think it will change. So it's basically, the way I say it, it's like if you look at mountain climbing, it's basically, you hammer in one plug, and it's only valid for as long as you pull yourself up. But for a next step, you have to focus there and you have to leave it behind, because otherwise you will stop. So it's having that realistic approach to it and always seeking kind of the next step, but also learning how to do it again and again and again. And one thing I always tell students is that, life will push you over and over, because balance is not the ability to stand up. It's the ability to rise up, and from any angle. And life will just kick you down harder and harder as part of learning to grow into that kind of crystallized principle. And it happens, but it's that willingness to confront yourself and to truly examine and filter out all the noise, filter out all the subjective like narratives and belief systems and all of that, and gradually be left with the unfiltered version. And so to me, like, true spiritual work and science is in many ways the same thing. It's just two different ways. And spiritual work is more based on, the exploration in itself and going out there wherever that is and learning how to be in harmony with it and truly like seeing it and observing it. But you don't necessarily have the right models to explain and convey, but you're actually there. You're actually in that reality. Instead of being here trying to figure out how it works, you've made that journey, and that becomes part of the kind of experienceable dimension that you find yourself in, also as a human. So to me, that is also the difference, because very often when I talk with scientists, they're still here in this level and they're trying to figure out what's on the other side. And spiritual explorers, we're already on the other side, but we can't explain it. So we're so this is
So,
why I feel it's so important that finally we have come to a phase in history where I think one is starting to realize that, oh, okay, this can be bridged. And that I think that
I
that's when things will really start to accelerate.
right. Yeah, I'm in large agreement with what you just said, and it seems that science now, since Galileo, which is a very brief time, just a few centuries, has developed these tools, and I think science is coming to the point where the big discovery of science is this is all just a headset. That science, I mean, the spiritual traditions have had that intuition. Science has clawed its way up to that as a conclusion from the rigorous theories that it's built. And so when physicists are saying that space-time is doomed, that's what they're saying. Our best, the result of centuries of this very vigorous, precise, experimental, and mathematical science has led us to the conclusion that space-time, which we took to be fundamental, is not fundamental. That's
Yeah.
incredible, right? That's showing that these tools can force us to the conclusion that the spiritual traditions have leapt to as an insight, right? So we're meeting, but what the nice thing about having both is that now the ones who crawled their way up through mathematics and experiments and so forth have also provided us with a set of
Yeah.
tools now to then go beyond the headset and to now start to explore the spiritual realm. Sort of, in some sense, we've
Yes.
awakened to the this
Yeah.
is just a headset.
I've
That means
compared this, especially when we've been talking with scientists, that human sciences are getting to the point of having their Truman Show moment.
right,
So it's
exactly, right,
basically that
right,
realization that, oh, okay, this is a set. We thought this was reality. And then you have then
right,
from like my way of explaining this is like when you are part of a spiritual tradition, you just like, oh, okay, this is a wall, and they just walk through it. While often science
right,
would be in the middle of it, trying to observe it, and so like, okay, is this actually the sky we're seeing, or is it a projection? Is it a poster? What is it? But instead of actually being able to touch the wall, they're trying to make an assessment from afar. So, the spiritual process is going there and testing it out and then walking through it. But the thing is, like, science is slowly getting also to that conclusion, which to me is so
right,
exciting because the only next step is that, okay, yeah, it's a wall. It wasn't the sky anyway. So like find the door and walk through it. And that to me
right,
is human science are like they're on the brink of that, not only realization, but then figuring, okay, how can we then move through? And they will have to then apply many of the same tools that one has applied in spiritual traditions, because basically you could never experience something that is beyond your own level of consciousness, because it is your level of consciousness that decides what you experience. So
yeah,
I think to implement consciousness work, and expansion and exploration will be an important part of what scientists will have to kind of do so they can also kind of physically move through that wall.
right. Well, and it's interesting that some scientists are now taking the first steps beyond the wall. So there's a guy at Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton named Nima
Mhm.
Arkani Hamed, and a bunch of collaborators. There are many collaborators, Jake Bergeli and others. They're they're the ones that are saying most loudly, space-time is doomed. There's something, and their entire research agenda now is to walk
Right.
through the door of the Truman Show and walk out. Now, the question is, if space-time is, if this is just a Truman Show, that space-time isn't fundamental, what, as a scientist, can we do to take the steps out of the door and to look at what's behind? And what they're doing is to say, well, it's our physics theories, quantum field theory and general relativity, that together are telling us that space-time is doomed. How much can those theories guide us beyond, right? Like, they can't really tell us exactly what's beyond space-time, but can they give us hints about what's beyond space-time? And so what they're doing is they're looking at the mathematical structure of these theories. And they're discovering that there are structures beyond space-time. So that the mathematics itself has symmetries that can't be expressed in space and time. So the symmetries are what they call dual conformal symmetries and infinite Yangian symmetries. If you stick in space-time, you can't see these symmetries, but the symmetries are there in the scattering data. When you, at the Large Hadron Collider, when you bang 2 gluons in and 4 gluons go spraying out, and you look at the probabilities, what they call the amplitudes for these various kinds of collision events or scattering events, you find these symmetries in the data that cannot be expressed in space-time. Right. And when you go beyond space-time, so effectively they're using the mathematics of our current physical theories as a flashlight beyond the door of the outside the Truman Show. So we're at this situation right now where scientists have this flashlight of mathematics. They're using symmetries and other things as the light into the dark, peering around, and they're finding these structures, something they call the amplituhedron, cosmological polytopes, associahedron. And these structures are beyond space-time. They're beyond quantum theory. There is no Hilbert space in the amplituhedron. There's no locality, there's no unitarity, the things that you would have in a local quantum field theory. But they can use these deep structures to actually quantitatively and precisely predict the amplitudes for scattering events at the Large Hadron Collider. In other words, what they're seeing is there is something beyond space-time, and that something doesn't care about locality and unitarity, which is the structure of space-time. It doesn't care about that at all. And it turns out it has symmetries that you can't see in space-time. So there's some deeper beauty beyond space-time that they're getting hints of. It predicts precisely what we experience in our headsets in these experiments. And by the way, it makes the math easier. So if you use what are called Feynman diagrams in quantum field theory to compute these scattering amplitudes, if you have like just 2 gluons in, 4 gluons going out, you have hundreds of pages of algebra to compute for one event. If you do it with this amplituhedron or these deeper structures, you have 3 terms, and you can compute it by hand. So you have these 2 things happening. When you let go of space-time, you find these beautiful symmetries that you wouldn't otherwise see, and the math becomes much easier. So it's a win-win situation. But they don't know what this deeper structure is about. So the flashlight has found these deeper structures, but there's a deep question: why? Why should the reality beyond space-time be an amplituhedron or a cosmological polytope? Why should it be? And what is there some kind of process theory, some kind of dynamical theory? See, these are just static entities. These are just static structures. They're like just sitting there, like a box or a jewel just sitting there. Is there some dynamical story? Physics likes to have some kind of dynamical story. So they have no dynamical story outside there. So what we would like from a spiritual point of view is to have some mathematical model of consciousness, which is a dynamical theory, and show how that dynamical theory, that's some kind of simplification of it, looks like these jewels.
Like, I often use the model of a fractal mathematics, because it's like how consciousness expresses itself is very similar to that. And basically when we talk about the process of manifestation, based on resistance. The way I explain it is, if you think of like the principle of a soul, and then whenever there is resistance, it simply means that that level of reality is something that the active consciousness is not able to relate to. The moment that happens, if we now think of linear time, the moment that happens, it will fractalize. It will kind of be split into smaller components. So basically, one can experience them not as the principle, but as manifestations showing different aspects of that principle. And maybe one of them you're able to realize and vibrate and absorb that part of it. And maybe the next part you're not. And when that happens, that will fractalize again until it hits a level of manifestation and consciousness where you're able to interact with it and learn. And when that happens, that particle of consciousness then will kind of like absorb, and be in harmony with that part. And then you have the defractalization process when all these different components have been realized piece by piece, and it becomes then the greater unit, and you will have to go through a new realization at that point. So there is this whole kind of expression of manifestation that is extremely precise, and what I can observe the mathematics, but I'm not able to express it in scientific terms. But it is very clear, and it's so beautiful. Watching those kind of like fractal-like kind of patterns of manifestation is breathtaking. And it's like every single manifestation thing we go through is part of that kind of fractalized element of that principle you're trying to get to for that full realization of vertical consciousness. So that is kind of what is driving the whole manifestation process through kind of the individual consciousness. And it happens through all these layers of collective horizontal reality.
That does make sense from a scientific point of view in the following couple of ways. There is a lot of work being done with deep neural networks, and everybody knows that these things are transforming our lives, right? I mean, you're able to have automatic language translation because of deep neural networks. Lots of things are being done that are transformative with these deep neural networks. The way to think about them is what they're doing is they're taking a bunch of agents and having agents interact to come to deeper understandings. And it's the dynamics of agents. And when you look at, in other words, what I'm suggesting is that the kind of vision that you're talking about, one of the technologies and the mathematical arenas in which we can, as scientists, and can study it, and in fact are studying it, is this whole area of neural networks. More generally, network information theory. But it's you have agent-based interactions, and it turns out that this thing is so complicated that we don't have a real good fundamental exhaustive mathematical framework for it. That's why right now what's happening is that a lot of the work is someone goes, I tried this, and wow, look, this seems to be working a lot better than anything else. And we don't have a lot of deep mathematics at this point to say, no, wait, this is the ultimate optimal deep neural network, and this is the right way to do it. No, we're still in this, and who knows, maybe that will be a feature that we find is permanent. Maybe it's part of this, what we were talking about earlier, that there's no ultimate right way for agents to interact, but there's an infinite variety of ways for them to interact and explore. But what we found in the deep neural network literature recently that's transforming our technology is that there's a wide variety of ways for agents to interact, to come to some kind of asymptotic behavior, as you say, a vibration, but some kind of asymptotic behavior that solves certain problems. And so there's, in fact, no problem that can't be solved this way. which is really quite interesting. It's a universal tool for exploration. And so I guess one concrete point that I would make here then is that the kind of vision that you're talking about this on the spiritual side could make contact on the scientific side with all the really good work and the powerful ideas coming out of deep neural networks and network information theory. That seems to be a
Right.
deep connection. It's in fact a connection that I myself am studying because, I mean, I've been working on, there's so much to work on. I've been working first just on showing that evolution entails that we don't
Right.
see the truth, because I needed to establish that. But now I'm working on just loosely the dynamics of consciousness. But I don't want to spend too much time there, because what I need to do first is show how whatever dynamics consciousness might have would project into space-time. So I'm really working on connecting with this amplitude-hedron and getting into space-time. Because if I can show how some dynamics of consciousness gets projected into space-time, I can then build this bridge that we could then use what we know in space-time and pull it back into consciousness. I want to take the last 4 or 5 centuries of science in the headset and say, I mean, I'm lazy. How much of that hard-earned knowledge I pull backwards and not have to just learn the stuff all over in the realm of consciousness? Can I just like pull it back from out of the headset into the realm of consciousness, knowing full well that it's the map from consciousness into the headset is a projection. So it's going backwards is fallible, but nevertheless, it might give me some ideas and some hints, some directions to explore on consciousness. So that's what have been focusing on, and probably will for the next 2 or 3 years, is really focusing on getting that bridge. But I'm also looking at the neural network and agent-based modeling, because agent-based modeling is really getting at this kind of cooperation that you were talking about before, that you build a consensus reality by cooperating. And so for those who are in the spiritual realm and want to make some kind of rigorous contribution to the science and spirituality working together, study one thing you can do is study these deep neural networks. You can make money with them, which is nice, but they would also then give you the tools to take your vision, which is a beautiful vision, and turn it into a mathematically precise mathematical simulation that we can then start to do. And in fact, another way to think about this is to say, look, there are hundreds of papers now that have been published by these researchers on deep neural networks. Let's look at what those papers are saying and see how much of what they've already done can give us interpretations that might be insightful in the spiritual realm about agents interacting. So if we abstract away from the specific problem, maybe they're only trying to play Go. And so they have an agent-based model that learns to play Go. Fine, maybe we don't care about Go, but can we look at what they did and step back and say, are there some general principles about how agents cooperate to solve problems and see, in this case, they saw the world of Go and they saw how to play Go. Great. Maybe we don't care about Go, but the abstractive idea about cooperating and seeing new ways to do things, that might generalize to what you call this vertical realm of spirituality.
Yes. Absolutely. Big part of what I offer people in the scientific field is that expansion of awareness, is assisting people in like thinking differently. It's like, because again, the human mind is always the limit. It's even when it comes to like having new ideas and grasping new concepts, it's always those kind of outer walls of the mind. And because you mentioned that earlier, like how can we actually move through that? And the only way is to vibrate differently, and that is basically raising your consciousness. And there is no way around it, because the interesting thing is that consciousness also is place. It determines space and time. So basically, where you are, the here and now changes with consciousness. And therefore, you will be able to see different things when we're able to make different connections. Because how life appears to you is based on your level of consciousness. So you will, get different ideas also intuitively. you will suddenly get different things. And it's like what was unclear suddenly becomes clear because you find yourself in a different reality. And this is, again, why I think it's so important that people of science work, with their own mind, with their own consciousness, and also then use the tools from spiritual traditions, the ones that work. I'm so clear about spirituality having to leave behind dogma, belief systems, all of that, because that is cultural. It's basically just like math. You have to peel away everything that is cultural, that is part of human condition, and over time you're then left with an extract. You're left with practices that work universally, and that can be applied. Because we have to open our minds. And often when I work with scientists, their kind of stuckness that's the greatest obstacle. That's what is keeping them inside the set of the Truman Show. They can sometimes get to the level they know this is a set, but they're not able to walk through the door because their consciousness is kind of like tied to the definition and the construct they find themselves in. And one has to activate more of the vertical consciousness. And it basically functions like an elevator. It's like you get into a different version of the same building. So you're still here, but you're in a different version. And it's concrete. And it's like weird once you experience it. But as I said, the version of life you experience is very different from a fly or a plant. It's still the same world, and yet it is not. And for science to truly move forward, scientists also collectively need to have an expansion of consciousness and then connect to that consciousness that is already beyond that veil.